Hello and welcome to the Digital Digest, the breakfast of champions for anyone in the digital space. We cover tips and tricks and general information for anyone trying to move things forward in this digital world of accounting. This show is brought to you by the Digital Disruptors and SB Digital, both of which are pushing the boundaries in the digital accounting space. I'm your host, Ryan Piercy, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Francis Kay from App Advisory Plus today to help us crack into the detail of all things digital transformation and how to effectively plan for it. So I guess as a quick intro then, Frankie, what do you do from a digital transformation perspective?
So with my AAP, App Advisory Plus hat on, I get involved in helping clients implement Xero and the apps around that in the ecosystem to help streamline their finances and their operational elements as well. And then hopefully those clients love it so much, they then go on to my Final Clerk hat, which is our accountancy firm. But that's just a Brucey bonus if that happens.
And I guess you bring in tech apps as part of your accounting firm as well. So you do digital transformation inside your own practice.
Yes, absolutely. So for our own clients, we have a standard app stack wherever possible. And then we've got our own internal app stack, which is changing quite frequently. But we've got solid systems at the heart and foundation of Final Clerk.
I mean, that's the main thing, right? The digital landscape is changing all the time, and you can't stay still if you want to be, I guess, at the forefront. So digital transformation is not just about, assisting other businesses. It's also what you have to do internally to make sure you are getting the most out of your own operations. So the key agenda point for today is to highlight what you need to consider before you actually start a digital transformation process and what can go wrong. So planning, I guess, is an incredibly important part of this. What do we need to do? What do we need to consider? What do we need to make sure is in place before we do a project to make sure it's successful? I think part of that is maybe starting with what can go wrong. So from stuff it's good to reflect on what can go wrong, right? Because we need to make sure that we prevent that happening. So from your side, Frankie, what are some of the areas, I guess, that you have experienced could go wrong from a digital transformation perspective?
Actually, over the years, the planning has gotten more and more in depth. Like when I first started, it was kind of like, I know what my general output wants to be, but how I get there was a little bit haphazard. So the more and more I do, the more I'm creating my own little playbook, which has saved my skin quite a few times in that I start to follow it and then go, oh, I haven't discussed that with the client. So I think the first thing to just say is, the amount of times I've spoken to clients and thought, well, this is what they want, and I haven't really delved into it. And then it turns out to be something entirely different, a bit bigger, and maybe out of my skill sets. And then there's that conversation to then be had after, one or two meetings to go, I need to put the brakes on this, whether it's to refer it to somebody else, or actually I need to research and do a whole lot more work. So I think the planning stage is actually part and parcel of the scoping stage, right? When you first have that call, is really try to understand what they want and repeat that back to them. That's also really important. Clarity on what you're looking at. I don't know if you've ever gone into a scoping session and you then find out that they don't have a CRM system. It's all based on spreadsheets. And you're like, well, that's not even part of what we're looking at, but it's a big thing that could impact what I'm now doing.
Yep.
So yes. So scoping's a big bit.
No, I mean, again, I think you touched on something perfect there, which is that you need to consider actually, one, do you have the skill set to do it? And that's on anything, right? You might have a great team, but the great team is doing the operations. They might not be able to project manage. They might not be able to internally assess. So you've got to really consider, do you have the skill set? And a perfect thing is things that come out of the woodwork that you hadn't considered in the first place. And that can be on anything, right? You can be considering that for a client, or you can be doing that internally. If you've not put down actually what are the must-haves of this project and where are we now, what are the structure we've got and the key requirements that we want to deliver, and what is the breadth of the project. Because what I've found many times before, as I guess you've alluded to, is someone goes, we've got a problem in this one specific area. And you dive into that and you find that area actually affects 3 other areas that you've not even considered. And if you haven't already kind of scoped that out, when you start then looking at systems, you miss other key critical requirements, don't you?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know whether it's easier if you're a business that's got no systems in, or actually by having existing systems already talking to one another, that just creates a whole nother level of complexity. So we've just put Carbon in, and then we had to consider integrating it with Practice Ignition, integrating with Pipedrive, and it's actually what's the entire workflow. It's not just Bosch, here's Carbon. It's then, right, we need to go back to the very source of the data and track it through. So it's probably as complicated as just going, right, let's just replace spreadsheets and go full new CRM, full new practice management system. And it's probably easier because you haven't got to understand what you've done previously. So that's where you just got to map it all out.
It can definitely be easier. In some extent, it can be easier to cover everything, can't it? It's a bigger project when you do that. And it's the depth you go into. Sometimes you can do kind of high level because you're looking at concepts and you're changing the way you work. And some you have to get into the minutiae. But I think we've kind of touched on, structure and systems themselves, but people is another key thing where things go wrong, can't it? You just don't get buy-in. You get complete loss of faith of if you deliver a project badly, trying to do the next project can be horrible because everyone's like, well, we don't trust this happening. And you just don't have the skill set or interest of those key individuals, and they just push back heavily, don't they?
Yes. I think we've implemented internally practice management systems over the past because every time they just didn't quite fit. And when we were a smaller firm, it was kind of me just heading up and saying, right, this is now what it is. This is the training. And that kind of worked because we were small enough to discuss it. But as we've grown, it's become really apparent that actually it's not my decision. It's getting the team in front of the products in the first place. So we did sort of, like a showcase of the opportunities that they could look at. And it was down to them to then shortlist and say, right, let's explore those. So it's to make sure that they're the ones doing the work, for instance. So it's important getting the right stakeholders in at the very first instance. Where appropriate, obviously, but it doesn't work so nicely when there's a big number of us. But
definitely.
Equally on the client side, like when we moved from cash flow to zero, our clients just trusted us and we did it. It was kind of like I would send an email going, this is what we think is best of breed. And I moved them and I didn't really get any kickback. But now it's when we're talking to clients and saying, we need to move on to zero, whatever it is, I don't know, maybe people are becoming more savvy and aware and have their own ideas on it.
Yeah, awareness has definitely increased. And I think people have also been burnt, right? They've gone through digital transformation projects, and in some cases it's been horrific. And they're like, okay, I need to be more aware of what's going on. So the other thing I guess that I've definitely experienced before is if you're not speccing it properly, you get all the way down the road and you're now getting to the point you bring in a system and then it's got one feature that's critical that's been missed that then means all the work that's been done to date is just a waste of time. And that's horrific. So I guess let's pull this back to what are the key steps that we need to consider. And I think one area that needs to be done early on is set objectives and make them clear. So be realistic. So don't make this too elaborate or too optimistic. Be realistic and make it kind of as kind of minimum requirements that you want to get from the project, and make them measurable where you can. So that doesn't need to be like financial, but that could be like that it's how your team have reflected in a positive way or negative way. You want it, everyone's bought into it, everyone understands it. It could be as simple as that, and you can measure that by asking them, and then make sure when you get to that point at the end that you reflect. So in that planning phase, you go, right at the end of this, we're going to have a reflection step. So you kind of mapped out stages you go through and you reflect on it. Is that something that you think is critical? Do you do that as part of your at least internal project work?
Lots of reflections happen internally. But yeah, absolutely. It's really, really key to have all of that set.
Yeah. And I think the thing you mentioned earlier, which is critical, right, is that nowadays you put more weight on the planning because you've learned from doing the previous projects, which I've done the same, that actually the more you bring forward, the smoother the whole thing goes.
Yes. I was just going to say also, I kind of set phases as well. So if again, on the client front, that you could go to them with an all singing, all dancing, let's change everything. But you've got to take a step back and say, actually, what's the critical things that you've needed from me? And let's do those. And then we can bring on the not nice to haves, because they're always going to be beneficial, but the ones that can come in afterwards. So I think definitely just breaking it down really helps as well, rather than saying everything all at once.
Definitely
helps with planning.
Is that must haves, the minimum spec, and then, as you say, the layering on of the nice to haves.
Yeah.
And you always reflect and go, have we delivered on the minimum?
Yeah.
Everything else is a bonus, and and pushes us further. I think the other area we've touched on already, but so we've kind of focused that setting objectives is critical. Communication and involving critical people is another critical step. Change management. You can't avoid change management in digital transformation, can you? You have to make sure that you are communicating effectively and bringing people along.
Yes. Yes. If we were talking about warts and all, in my earlier years, somebody up top decided things were going to change, didn't necessarily tell their team. I come in with my expectations. All this usually takes, 3 days, whatever, to train people. And that training time almost tripled. And by the end of it, it was they put a halt on it. And that was purely because the team didn't know why we were changing, because as far as they're concerned, the systems worked really great for them. It was systems they'd used for 20 years. So you've got to, as you say, you've just got to talk to people at the very beginning. And if that means doing demos, hand holding, showing them how it's going to look, because people need to be able to visualize it and actually understand what it means for them, to then be able to say, okay, you can see the benefits.
Make it tangible. So just actually weirdly, just seeing what it looks like is such a key thing for people to get bought in. And as you said earlier, at every level. So top level, someone has to be bought in because they need to drive it. And, bottom level, the people that are actually doing the work have to be bought in because they need to understand. And I always found when you're talking to those that are going to be working on the system, be very clear that they are going to suffer some pain for a period before they get to that perfect world. Because whenever you change a system, you change all your processes, all your muscle memory goes, and you have to learn it. And you've got at least a 3-month period before you start to feel the benefits. Be open, be honest with that, and make sure that everyone is completely aware that will occur.
And it's also again, if we talk about our recent practice management implementation, we had our champions, and the amount of time that required from them to do the planning bit, not only then being the champion, then the training, and then filtering it down, it is huge amounts of time, and that needs to be factored in. And allowances made for in their day-to-day to make sure that they can do it without begrudgingly going, this is just extra work for me.
Yeah, we're going through we're reviewing our payroll process, and the payroll team's already at kind of breaking point from a resource level. So we are having to factor in how can we take all of that off them, the change perspective, to make it as easy for them. And we're looking at additional resource on a short period of time to enable that. And that can be from internal, moving somewhere across to hand it before you kind of move people back. But definitely consider the fact that it will be an additional period through testing and implementation and training, and then that kind of initial period, like the 3-month period while everyone gets up to speed. And then I guess finally, the final area I want to focus on here is understanding where you are, right? You can't like reflect on where you get to if you don't understand where you are. We've touched on must-haves, but the other bit that I think is critical to focus on is process mapping. Map out the flow of how you operate, the steps that it goes through, and you identify so many pains when you do that, like pinch points or complete reliance on one critical person that if they're not around, everything falls apart. And so many people ingest information visually. So process mapping, visually, so that you can, as you said before, send that to a client or send that to your team and get them to review it and feedback. You pick up so many things that people hadn't considered by that kind of feedback loop.
It is also not to use, let's use the word evidence. When you're then talking back to them about time saving, the benefits, it's really easy to identify those little manual bits or the painful bits. And you can use those to say, this will go, for instance, this might disappear. And most people go, oh my God, yes, because that's the worst part of my job. And you think, well, there you go. And it kind of, again, helps with that
Buying,
highlighting. Yeah, absolutely. Highlight the real nasty pain points, and you know, the scoping and the diagrams. It really helps. It really helps.
Yeah. And the other thing you can do, which not everyone does, but you can process map for them what the new world looks like, you know, in a hypothetical way. There's always little nuances, but hypothetical way, and then show them the difference. And so many times when I'm doing it, it's like, here is a 20-step process you do now, and here is a 7-step process of the new world. And you can, they just go, wow, I can visually see now the difference it's going to have on my time.
Yes.
Now, we're not going to go into depth on process mapping in this session, but there will be a future Digital Digest session diving into process mapping, how it can be done and how it can be done effectively. So please, if you're interested in that, look out for that show in a few weeks' time. But, you know, we always try and keep this to a relatively short period. So at that point, I'm going to bring this to a close, Frankie, and thank you for coming on. Hopefully, for everyone that's been watching this episode, has provided you with valuable insights that you can take forward, you know, in any digital transformation project you have. Please do check out the show notes and the links to Digital Disruptors, SP Digital, and Amplify Plus, which we'll share alongside this, and anything and anyone that we potentially discuss as well along the way. And if you want to ensure you catch future episodes, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it'll make sure you then pick up any future release. And if you don't subscribe, then just check out the post that we release on a Thursday morning at about 8:30 every Thursday. And hopefully I look forward to speaking to you next week.